Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kelly Pence, and I'm with Carousel Technology Corporation, and I would just like to welcome you to today's webinar. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Melissa.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Kelly, for getting us kicked off here today. And thank you to our audience for joining us for this session in our ongoing Talk Data to Me virtual series. My name is Melissa Hart. I'm the Director of Marketing at Hitachi Vantara Federal. And I'm going to give you a little bit of overview on how the session is going to go today. So first and foremost, you're going to be hearing a lot from our expert speaker, who I'll be introducing more formally in just a moment. But we'd also like to hear from you. So we will be interspersing some polls throughout the session so we can learn a little bit more about our audience. And of course, as Kelly mentioned, at the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A session where we'd like to hear from you, any questions that come up during the conversation. So in terms of the topics for today, our featured speaker is first going to introduce us to the main topic, setting the stage for what we're dealing with today in terms of managing massive amounts of data. And then he's going to talk in detail about each of the challenges, the top data storage challenges, one being security, two being complexity, and three being efficiency, where we'll not only hear some best practices and ideas, but also talk in more detail about what you should be thinking about. So with that, let's meet our featured speaker today. So James Langley, a little bit about James. He's the Master Solutions Consultant here at Hitachi Vantara Federal. He's been a services and solutions engineer with over 25 years of experience in both the commercial and public sector technology market. But here at Hitachi Vantara Federal, James is our lead subject matter expert on Hitachi storage solutions and has designed mission-critical environments for a variety of federal agencies, including the FBI, the Pentagon, and the Department of Agriculture. Prior to working here at Hitachi Vantara Federal, James served as the Senior Solutions Delivery Manager at Brocade Communications, and he's also held various technology leadership roles with like Dell EMC and other Hitachi partners, and he's worked directly at the U.S. Department of State. James attended the University of Virginia, and he holds multiple industry certifications in the areas of data of storage architecture, solution positioning, and process management. You may have actually even seen some of the articles James has published on specifically hybrid cloud needs and capabilities in publications like FedTech Magazine, Federal Computer Week, and Cyber Defense Magazine. So with that, James, I'd like to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Melissa, and thanks everyone for joining this morning. So really just to kind of set the stage, right? Why do we want to talk about the challenges of data storage itself? And really, it's the challenge of the rising tide, with managing the deluge of data. How much data are we dealing with? Well, every minute, there's 188 emails that are sent, 4.5 million videos that are viewed on YouTube, and over 500,000 tweets posted on X, formerly Twitter. The average organization's data storage needs are currently growing at a rate of about 40% year over year. That's fueled by the proliferation of IoT devices, social media, and digital transformation initiatives. In fact, Forbes recently did a survey where they revealed that 70% of businesses see this increase of data. So it's obvious, but they're not aware of the full extent of their growing data needs. So whether it's individual files, enterprise level information, now more than ever, effectively managing this deluge is essential to thrive in the digital landscape. Today, we're going to explore three major challenges faced by organizations in their data storage journey: security, complexity, and efficiency, which of course leads us to our first audience poll.
Excellent. Okay, so as James mentioned, our first poll, we want to hear from you. Out of the three topics we're going to be talking about today, security, complexity, and efficiency, what is your top data storage challenge? So we'll give it a minute for everybody to jump in so we can hear from you. All right, looks like we're up and down, security, complexity, efficiency, all kind of close to each other. All right, still moving. Okay. All right, let's close the poll. I guess I'm actually not that surprised, but it looks like our top challenge is actually, it's a tie now between security and complexity. So very interesting, James. Why don't you walk us through the first challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at data security, right? Let's start with that. you know, we're in an interconnected world, and protecting our data from unauthorized access, breaches, and cyber threats is fairly paramount. According to the Identity Theft Resource Center, in 2021, so this continues to rise year over year, the US reported over 1,000 data breaches, exposing over 155 million customer records. So you look at that in terms of what that costs. So IBM Security actually did a study. They called it the Cost of Data Breach Report, and found that the average cost of a data breach globally was $4.25 million, with the US having even higher costs, averaging about 8.68 million. So whether we're talking the commercial industry or the federal government, these data breaches are costly and damaging to an organization's reputation. So we have to know that ensuring data security isn't just a matter of compliance, but it also directly affects financial stability, the ability to execute on different programs, and obviously secure additional funding. Because a breach itself could result in legal fines, loss of citizen or customer trust, and again, have that long-term financial impact. Now, likely the most prominent security measure we're all familiar with, or we hear as a buzzword when it comes to security, is zero trust. Looking at the federal government, there's no single piece of legislation or executive order that specifically mandates the implementation. But there are several laws and initiatives that have encouraged and supported its adoption. These are FISMA, so the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, right? This is a key piece of legislation that requires federal agencies to develop and implement comprehensive cybersecurity programs. It doesn't explicitly mention zero trust, but it does emphasize risk management, continued monitoring, and protection of federal systems that align with zero trust. In fact, for those of you that are familiar with FedRAMP, FISMA actually was the foundation that FedRAMP was built upon. So in the same way that you have FedRAMP low, medium, and high, there was FISMA low, medium, and high. Then, of course, everyone looks to NIST, right? The National Institute of Standards and Technology. So they've given cybersecurity guidelines and frameworks. They actually published their special publication 800-207, and that specifically discusses zero trust concepts and to provide guidance on how to implement it. Of course, from a overall monitoring and evangelizing perspective, as well as enforcement, there's CISA at DHS, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and they're responsible for securing our IT infrastructure and have actually actively promoted the adoption of zero trust. From an executive level, the most important in terms of looking at zero trust was Executive Order 1428 about improving the nation's cybersecurity. And then there are multiple executive orders before that that are very much focused on strengthening our cybersecurity principles and programs. Now, the civilian side of the house likes to do things kind of on their own, but they often do look to the Department of Defense for some of their guidance, even beyond what NIST may put out. And that's where the Department of Defense has its own zero trust architecture that they've put out. They've specifically called it the DoD Zero Trust Reference Architecture. They use fancy names over there. But the initiative serves as an example of how government agencies can deploy zero trust policies and how they can enforce them. So while they support the adoption of zero trust, they don't necessarily mandate it, right? There isn't anything coming directly from Congress as the sole approach to cybersecurity. Instead, all of these things provide a framework to agencies to develop and implement cybersecurity strategies that align with their needs and their risk profiles. As a result, the adoption varies based upon the individual cybersecurity priorities or requirements of a given agency. So what is zero trust, right? Everyone talks about it. Everyone thinks it's important, obviously. There's, executive orders, there's reference architectures, but what does it really mean, right? Zero trust is a cybersecurity framework and approach that emphasizes the never trust, always verify, right? So in the old days, it was trust but verify. Now it's never trust, always verify when it comes to security. These aren't exclusive to the US government. It was actually put out in 1994 in a doctoral paper and then evangelized by market analysts. So we look at this in terms of encompassing government agencies, commercial entities, and cloud service providers, essentially everyone dealing with data security today. But the government itself, in a lot of its different architectures, highlights some of these key principles that they put out when it comes to their approach to zero trust. So the first thing is obviously pretty simple, right? Assumption of zero trust. It means that no entity, whether it's a user, their device, an application, a network component, some piece of hardware, should be trusted by default, right? There used to be a time where we talked about demilitarized zones or DMZs when it came to network security, and there was everything that should be trusted kind of hid behind it, and then everything that you might expose lived in it, right? That's gone now. So with an assumption of zero trust, everyone has to justify their level of access that's required, and trust and privileges should never be granted just based upon where someone's location is. Like they sit in the office or they're on this network, means that they should be able to access whatever they want. Another key principle is least privilege access. That means both us as users, as well as our systems, the devices, are granted the least amount of permissions to perform our tasks. That is combined with strong authentication methods such as multi-factor authentication and IAM, or identity access management policies, that can help verify the identity of us and our devices. The key to that is multi-factor prevents unauthorized access, even if your credentials are compromised. And along this comes with a couple of other requirements, right? A key component of that is continuous verification, right? I get this all the time. I'm trying to check my email or I'm trying to update something at work and I have to log in again. Or I'm doing my banking and it says your session is timed out, right? That's what continuous verification is all about, is making sure that it's not you sign in once and you're always there. And another key piece is continuous monitoring and analytics, right? The goal of this is not only to track what occurs, but really detect unusual or suspicious behavior, right? Anomalies are what you want to investigate. So if you think about that in terms of data storage, a really simple example is you have a system that's backed up every night, right? Suddenly, those backups grow by 75 to 100%. Or Melissa's OneDrive, usually she opens a couple of files, maybe she's sending it to a different person on the team. But today, Melissa decided that she was going to open and edit every single file she stored, right? These are clear signs of ransomware, right? So those are the kind of things that continuous monitoring and analytics look at. And then outside of course, the assumptions, the verifications, the monitoring, is how things are built, right? And that means that we look at microsegmentation, right? This is especially big in virtualized networking and in cloud networking, right? When you talk about VPCs and the like. And that means dividing the network into smaller, isolated zones. The goal of that is to reduce the threat of lateral movement, right? So usually when someone gets into your network, they get in as, I'm Melissa. Melissa clicked the link, and I'm going to keep picking on you, Melissa, so I apologize. But Melissa clicks a link that says, hey, you've got to update this info in order for you to get payroll this Friday, right? So Melissa updates that. Maybe Melissa's not an admin, but as someone that sent that to her, fishing for that information, I now have access, right? And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go laterally in the network and see what Melissa can access, right? And that's based on her permissions. Microsegmentation means general discovery of the network is limited, right? In military terms, we often call this kind of defense in depth, right? But the key also is that all of that data that's traveling, even in a microsegmented network, needs to be encrypted, both in flight and at rest, right? And that means that even if me as a bad actor, I get the data, it still remains secure and confidential, right? But one of the core things, again, with this never trust, always verify when it comes to zero trust is looking at adaptive security, right? That means that security policies and security guidelines are not rigid and non-changing. We can't just say, hey, we did it, we checked the box, we installed a lock on our door so we know we're constantly safe. It means our policies have to be adjusted in real time to ensure that we're looking at the current risk posture, current user behavior, and overall the threat intelligence. And then lastly, a key component, of course, is user education and training, right? You can deploy everything, but if people don't know what they should and should not do on a network or what their responsibility is when it comes to network security, it's really easy for a bad actor to get involved. So ongoing user education and training are critical. And when you look at these from assumptions of zero trust, authentication, microsegmentation, encryption, adapting, and training, these are the core principles that the US government looks at in terms of adopting these zero trust principles to reduce their what they call attack surface, which is your exposure, right? Limits how much people can get in, minimize the risks of breaches, and of course, enhance your ability to detect and respond to threats. So there's a lot to talk about with zero trust. So this may be one of the larger segments in here, but I want to talk about how that relates to data storage, right? So, what is a zero trust storage area network, right? SANs are a critical component of our modern IT infrastructure. So let's look at how a storage area network and our storage components stack up in the zero trust arena, right? Because it's essential for enhancing our security and protecting data. The good news is there's actually a lot in a storage area network that already aligns with zero trust, right? We already design a SAN in distinct segments or zones based upon the principle of least privilege. A worldwide port name zone ties a system's permissions to a specific hardware ID. On top of that, we have LUN masking that provides the equivalent of an ACL that ensures a volume can only be accessed by an authenticated host. You combine that with hardware-based authentication, such as what Brocade offers in their host bus adapters, and a system can validate that how it's communicating with the storage area network is, in fact, a verified and constantly verified source, right? But even beyond that, the key is also to then look at virtual SANs, kind of like a VLAN or virtual fabrics that allow further segmentation. And that's really critical whenever the SAN needs to cross into the WAN, right? So often the SAN, you can have an IP SAN, but a lot of SANs are fiber channel. And there comes a point at which it needs to cross into the WAN, say, for replication needs. And that's where having that microsegmentation, strict routing policies that restrict communication between segments, and overall enforcing those policies limits that attack exposure, right? To only allow authorized systems to communicate to those needs, right? So at our core, we began 20 years ago with network segmentation when it came to SANs. But one of the things that's become more and more important, again, is implementing a strong authentication and authorization mechanism, right? And a lot of this comes down to not just the devices, but the users, the people that have the tools, the people that have the keys to the castle, right? Because an angry storage administrator can really wreak havoc on your life, whether it's the inability to recover data, the inability to access data, or the inability to use your data, right? So we have to use technologies, and most vendors, including Hitachi, are now focused on using role-based authentication controls in order to provide the least level of access on permissions. But more and more, it's important to identify and implement those identity and access management solutions, including centralized user provisioning, multi-factor authentication, and identity lifecycle management. What's identity lifecycle management? It's, hey, I haven't accessed my user credentials in 30 days. I shouldn't be a user anymore, right? Those are things that we constantly need to look at. When it comes to data encryption, right? Again, the goal is even if someone gets the data, they can't read it. We have technologies like disk level encryption with FIPS 140-2 and soon to be 140-3 that are a critical core component for encrypting data at rest when it comes to data storage. And then, of course, when it comes to data in flight, you have both IPsec, if you're doing an IP-based storage area network, and FCSP, which is used to control the communication between switches. That's critical to make sure that people can't snoop on the network, right? To ensure secure key management. All of these encryption protocols are essential in creating that zero trust SAN. But it doesn't just stop there, right? A lot of times when we look at SAN, we're looking at things from a performance perspective, right? But we really need continuous monitoring and logging of activities that occur. That means how systems are accessing storage. That means how users are accessing storage. And it means we need to take those syslog data, that SAN user data, and put it into SIM tools and other log analysis tools to detect and respond to any unusual or suspicious behaviors, or even things as simple as looking at trends, right? If trends change, that's a sign that there could be a data breach. We have to conduct regular security audits and assessments, remediate those as necessary. And then beyond the technology, we want to develop and enforce zero trust policies that govern access, right? So this should be based upon that principle of never trust, always verify, continually verifying and making sure that us as users, right, when we come to user training, education, and administrator training, that we have those best practices, right? It's not just technology that should be enforcing that. It should be people and their day-to-day standard operating procedures that help us secure our data storage needs, right? So while it's important to tailor our zero trust strategies to these specific requirements and understand that in many ways, data storage and data storage area networks are inherently designed with a lot of the core principles of zero trust, we still need to ensure that we're implementing these best practices so we're positioned to conquer those security challenges that may lie ahead. And that leads us as a great time for our next poll question.
Excellent. So of course, James, you talked a lot about zero trust and the adoption of zero trust across the government. So we want to hear from our audience. We've got representation from a variety of different agencies on the phone. So tell us how you think your organization is doing in the adoption of zero trust. Are you very mature, somewhat not mature, very immature, or not sure? So we see the answers coming in now. We'll give it another few seconds or so to see where people think that they're landing, their organizations are landing.
And don't worry, it's anonymous. So
yeah,
you're not going to get singled out if you decide that, you guys aren't doing the right thing. So
great point. Okay, it looks like the results are slowing down, James. So our audience here mostly says somewhat mature, which is pretty promising.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? A lot of agencies, right? Everything in the federal government or even in the commercial sector, right? Change takes time, and moving to a zero trust architecture or zero trust, mindset. Again, it's a change from what we've done for 20 or 30 years, right? In IT, right? IT began in the 60s, right? There used to be the security existed because no one knows how to get to it, right? And now we've had to shift that mindset with the cloud environment and multi-cloud environments. So it makes sense. It's good to see that most people have some progress, right? When it comes to zero trust, but I wouldn't expect anyone to necessarily be done when it comes to zero trust, because again, that's a core principle of the adaptive security. So let's kind of move on and kind of look at our next topic, which is data complexity, right? I want to kind of talk about this as the data storage landscape grows, right? The biggest thing that everyone's talking about today is multi-cloud environments. So Dimensional Research recently did a survey of IT professionals, and 77% of us consider complexity to be our most significant data storage related challenge, right? Complex data environments, we have inefficiencies, you can have errors, higher operating costs. So it's really important to simplify that complexity to be more efficient, reduce our downtime, and really make us a data-driven organization. So what are the causes of complexity? I kind of want to look at that from the 5 V's of big data, right? Volume, variety, veracity, and value. So let's kind of dive into that, right? Challenges, data volume, right? We already know in a multi-cloud environment, data is proliferating rapidly. In fact, the ongoing estimate is that every 2 years, we create more data than has been created in the history of mankind, right? So just think about that. That first came out as an adage at around 2010. So just imagine how much our data continues to explode, right? So volume's pretty easy to understand. Variety, though, in multi-cloud environments, right? Probably something that you can understand to a bit. We've got multiple different systems that we're accessing, whether it be software as a service, a CRM tool, a BI. There could be on-premise. We have different types of data storage systems like data warehouses or EOPs. We could have data lakes or IoT data. And all of that means that we have a variety of data sources. In addition, every hyperscaler has its own data formats and structures. They try to have some level of uniformity like S3, but the further you go in the stack of a hyperscaler, the more kind of locked in you're looking at proprietary technologies and proprietary data sources, right? And that means that it's more complicated for us to deal with that data variety. Volume and velocity, they go pretty much hand in hand, right? So understanding why that's a challenge in multi-cloud is pretty obvious. But when you look at the variety, when you look at the volume, when you look at the speed that it's coming in, that's where data governance and veracity becomes a real challenge from a complexity standpoint. Both knowing that our security is significant to ensure that the data coming in is accurate, consistent, and valid, as well as making sure that our data governance and security policies are consistent in a multi-cloud environment. Then, of course, there's data value, right? Our ultimate goal with everything we do with data storage, big data, analytics, and the like is to drive some value, whether it's monetary value, whether it's mission value, or the like, right? Data migration and portability can be complex when dealing with multi-cloud. These very data sources, the speed of that, cost management becomes crucial. And so being able to challenge or overcome the complexity that exists in our multi-cloud environment is really kind of critical to essentially do something with what we're collecting, right? As a data storage guy, we often talk about how 20% of the world's data is active data and 80% is inactive. Some of that is because that's the most important stuff we look at, right? But another reason is that with the volume, variety, and complexity, it means we're not really being able to analyze that data. So it's kind of core that we look at those at solutions that we can have to overcome that. So gonna be a little bit, I am someone that works for Hitachi, and our approach to this, we kind of call the, not kind of call, but we call the Hitachi Universal Data Management Architecture. We don't create a lot of like brand names, so everything is Hitachi. But ultimately, this is a framework to simplify activities across data silos and applications. Ingesting and dealing with disparate data sources is something that we can streamline significantly when we look at a couple of key components in creating a universal data management architecture that can provide the required agility, scalability, efficiency, and cost savings, right? One of the keys where I would start is data storage virtualization platforms, right? This enables a virtualized consolidation of multiple data silos, right? It means that your data that is both on-premise and off-premise is rapidly mobile. You can move workloads to where they need to be. You can move workloads to the most efficient type of storage, and that means that you can deal with that data effectively. You, of course, on top of that, need a modernized data infrastructure itself, right? A hybrid cloud-ready data infrastructure that spans your primary storage, whether it be block, file, object, converged, and keeping in mind that that modernized data infrastructure has to play well with both on-premise and cloud operations. A key component that we see when it comes to universal data management is having some type of quick start management, and really automation is key, right? Having data storage virtualization lets you move the workloads around. Having a modernized infrastructure means that it is something that can rapidly respond and evolve. But really automation, tools like Hitachi Automator, Ansible, Terraform, or even sometimes custom scripts are really necessary to orchestrate a data ingestion process, right? So an automation workflow could schedule, trigger, monitor data ingestion tasks to reduce that manual intervention. And it's also important with things like Ansible, Terraform, Automator to be able to deploy those systems rapidly, to rapidly provision and improve your storage infrastructure's efficiency, as well as take away a lot of the common day-to-day tasks. So we actually have a large commercial customer that they are I'm not allowed to say their name, but they are a commercial customer that deals with credit processing, right? So a lot of point of sale stuff. And they were able to shrink their workforce that dealt with day-to-day provisioning by 60% after deploying a lot of our automation solutions. And that was pretty critical. It didn't mean that people lost their job, because I don't know anyone today that feels like they have nothing to do, right? We have unemployment lower than 4%, right? So everybody's working. It meant that they could refocus those individuals to be more strategic. And when you think about that in terms of data management and data science, right? Storage engineers used to be expensive. Now data scientists are very expensive. So being able to automate and free up their cycles to do more detailed analysis is pretty key. You also want to ensure that outside of the data, you have some type of application insight that allows you to optimize your application data availability and place it on efficient storage, perhaps lower cost infrastructure, and also deliver on sustainability goals, right? So a key thing in application insights is working with automation, but also implementing APIs and web services, or looking for solutions that have APIs and exposed web services so that you can build connectors or scripts to interact with them and further automate your pieces. There are two kind of ways in terms of general approach that at Hitachi we look at for universal data management, and one is data ops, right? So that means leveraging a data operations platform like Pentaho to create a virtual layer that abstracts the complexities of disparate data storage, right? A low-code, no-code style environment that can pull in disparate data types and work through them quickly. We employ what we call a change data capture technique that captures and synchronizes data so that we're only looking for changes or updates from the source systems. Automating that CDC process minimizes the amount of data we have to pull in and process during ingestion, and that overall really enhances our efficiency, right? Pentaho has automated data governance policies and practices to enforce access, security, compliance. Our data catalog technology looks at data lineage, as well as helps classify that data. And then outside of that, our other main operating tool or operating methodology that we work with at Hitachi is what we call AI ops, right? So that means utilizing AI and machine learning algorithms to simplify operations, whether that's enforcing best practices, enforcing security, doing anomaly detection, or automating the data transformation tasks using that ETL process. You can have ETL tools that automatically standardize and transform your data to match your desired schema, right? And we do that a lot today. We work with a very significant portion of the executive branch to pull in disparate data sets that include email, video, memos, audio, phone calls, and the like. We capture all that, extract it all, tag it all, load it all, and put it in formats that can then be accepted by our national archives, right? So you may see this challenge in terms of a cybersecurity challenge. It could be a fleet management challenge. It could be a personnel challenge, but all of us have some massive data ingest need, and using AI ops to automate and minimize a lot of those simple operations and optimize our efficiency is a critical component of our universal data management platform. And also, lastly, an important piece, I know I've said automation a lot, but not just automating processes, but our automation platforms that we built into our universal data management architecture also work at automating the documentation process and facilitate the knowledge sharing with a team, right? It's really easy for someone, well, not easy necessarily, but it's fairly easy for a smart person to build a script or an automation workflow or the like, but they don't always get around to documenting it well, right? So being able to automate that documentation process to facilitate that education of other users is fairly critical as well, and something that's often overlooked. By incorporating a lot of these different technologies into a data ingestion strategy, we can simplify the process and reduce the manual effort. That overall is going to enhance data quality and allow us more efficient analysis and decision making to overall simplify the complexity of the amount of data, the data sources, and the type of insights we're trying to get with data storage as it exists today. So let's take a look at our third poll question, right?
Excellent. So you should see it pop up here in just a second. Does your organization have a data governance strategy? And if so, we want to know how mature it is. Very mature, somewhat not mature, very immature, and not sure. So we'll give you a second here to cast your vote on behalf of your organization.
Okay. It looks like everyone's feeling pretty good. So yeah, it looks like most people are somewhere between, feeling somewhat mature about the data governance strategy, the integration and analysis, or very mature, right? And that's really good to know, right? So if you have a good data governance strategy, one of the things that often is still a challenge, we looked at our first poll, is data complexity, right? So again, building that unified data management platform that can easily scale to ingest data and take those disparate data sources is how we take just, your data governance and integration kind of to the next level. So I want to tackle our last topic today, and that's talking about data efficiency, right? Now, what I've got up here are a lot of the different, statistics that I kind of talked about when we were first kind of setting the stage. But I want to put this into a different way of looking at it. And that's what we call the global data sphere, right? So this is a term that IDC coined. And the global data sphere is the amount of data that's created, replicated, and consumed each year, right? So when we talk about the data sphere, there's a data sphere for 2023, there'll be one for 24 and 25, right? And that's just what we create, capture, replicate, and consume. It doesn't include everything we already have made. By 2025, IDC has projected that the global data sphere will grow to 175 zettabytes. I'm not making up a term, it's a real term. A zettabyte is a billion terabytes. And why do I use the term terabytes? Well, most of our laptops today can hold about a terabyte. So think about a billion terabytes, right? I'm even going to do something that is not usually asked for, but how long is 1 billion feet? Right? So a billion feet, which is, an average laptop is about 12 inches long, give or take, right? Maybe you have a 13. A billion feet is 189,000 miles, right? So if you think about the laptops that would have to store the data we create in a year, it's going to stretch somewhere between here and the moon, right? Just visually think about that, and I do that because whether we're talking about like government budgets or data, some of these numbers are so large that it's just hard to visualize, right? Your brain gets to a point where it's just, okay, too big. And so think about that. We produce enough data that we could stack laptops from here to the moon. And, maybe that's the answer for SpaceX. Maybe that'll get us back to the moon faster, is if we just start stacking all the data we create and use that to walk there. I don't know. But, managing that means that obviously how efficient we are in managing and storing that data is fairly critical, right? So let's look at some ways that you can maximize your efficiency when it comes to data storage. The first thing to look at, here's kind of a common data storage scenario, right? Whether it's through multiple procurements or programs, An enterprise is going to find itself utilizing multiple data storage vendors, right? That alone creates its own complexity outside of the data with multiple tool sets, best practices, skill sets. At Hitachi, we overcome this with storage virtualization. Storage virtualization is a transformative approach in the world of data management. It's all about breaking down those traditional barriers. We can eliminate islands of storage. To think about it in terms of, imagine your organization's data spread across different islands and different systems. Whether you're on-prem or in the cloud, you're a multi-cloud shop in all likelihood. So you've got some things on-prem. On-prem will be in this system, that system, that system. Off-premise will be in this bucket, that bucket, that bucket, perhaps in this cloud or that cloud, right? And so when you virtualize storage, you really are breaking down those silos, right? The common challenge of storage silos and islands of storage, you have captive storage that can't be utilized anymore, and that leads to inefficiencies and complexities in managing your data, right? So by virtualizing the storage, we actually are the bridge that connects these various islands, consolidating them into a cohesive environment. As your data grows, so can your capacity. We allow scalability without disruption. You can seamlessly add new resources to accommodate to your needs. And it also allows you to centralize your day-to-day operations and administration, right? So again, in complexity, you've got different skill sets, different best practices, different tools, right? Using a storage virtualization engine means you can centralize your operations and administration with a single pane of glass. You can maximize your investment in those assets by extending the life of existing assets or even giving them capabilities they never fully had. Perhaps you have multiple vendors in your data center and you think you're limited to, well, I have to buy this other vendor because it's the only way to replicate. With a storage virtualization engine, we take on the replication, meaning you can have a heterogeneous environment underneath and continue to maintain your RPO and RTO requirements. You also have, obviously, data mobility and migration ease. You can quickly take systems as they reach end of life and decommission them, right? It means all your data migrations that have occurred today, once things are virtualized, can now occur transparently without any disruptions to your users or your applications. And you can optimize overall performance and availability, right? It matters. Different storage technologies are going to have different capabilities. Perhaps one does something better, perhaps one is faster than the other, and one is cheaper than another, right? Utilizing storage virtualization means you can take those multiple vendors and tier them out to where they are most effective, which is the other way that we really deal with adding efficiency in data storage. And that's in tiered storage or hierarchical storage management, right? A lot of times this isn't necessarily discussed with an end customer because the world has shifted kind of more in terms of all flash. But these principles of tiered storage are actually common themes that are utilized by cloud service providers, big data analytics, and high performance computing, right? If you're servicing Windows or Unix or VMware, you may be in an environment where you think all flash solves your challenge. But when you look at the data sizes of those three other environments, they have to have a tiered storage solution. The greater the amount of data, the more important it is to place that in the right place at the right time. So this gives us the ability to do things like data classification. So think of tiered storage as kind of like a librarian organizing the books on your shelves. Not all are equal, not all is of the same importance, right? So tiered storage begins by classifying the data into categories based on significance, access, and speed, and then puts them accordingly. You also obviously have cost efficiency by taking high performance storage that think of it like a sports car, right? It's fast, but it's expensive to maintain, right? That optimizes your cost by aligning your data with the right media. Frequently accessed data is on that highest tier, while less critical data can be on lower cost, slower storage. You can optimize your performance, right? And that means that you can kind of segment your applications and workloads based upon their tier. So imagine your data as a team of athletes. Some are sprinters, some are marathon runners, right? So by putting your applications on the right tiers of storage, you can ensure that like workloads work together. And of course, a simple one is data lifecycle management. Determining least access data gets put on lower tiers. And ultimately, it also gives you scalability and flexibility, right? When you do tier storage, you can think of your storage arrays, especially if virtualized, like Lego bricks, right? So build on as needed, take away as needed to do what you want to do. The next thing with obviously efficiency is how we do what we call adaptive data reduction techniques. And these are two major techniques, data compression and deduplication. When we talk about data storage, we really only deal with what we call lossless compression, right? And for the nerds, here's a quick summary of the different ways that it works, right? Dictionary-based compression, no, it doesn't mean you use like the Oxford English Dictionary or Webster's, but instead it looks at the data and looks for common phrases or data sets and gives them codes, right? So think of it like you and your friend have a code book. Hello is H1, good is G1, morning is M1, right? Instead of writing hello, have a good morning, I just send you H1, G1, M1, and you understand, right? That's what dictionary compression does. There's run length compression. Oops, sorry. There's run length compression. And run length compression I actually have here up on the slide. It's pretty simple, right? You have repeating characters or repeating patterns, and you just record them based upon the pattern and how frequently they occur. And then there's what's called entropy encoding, which is really similar to dictionary. It just means that we kind of go beyond the dictionary. And if there's common things, we create kind of short codes. And if there's less common things, we create slightly longer codes, but that are still shorter than the amount of data. And that's how we compress it. But keep in mind, data compression doesn't work with every workload, right? And every type of data. A thing we have to understand is that when it comes to data compression and capacity savings, you have things like already compressed data, right? Your zips, your RARs, your 7zs, your gzips, or the like, they're already compressed. You're not going to shrink them further. In fact, believe it or not, your Office documents are actually a compressed data format. So unless they're identical, they're very hard to compress further. Encrypted data, right? Compression's about looking at patterns. Encryption means destroying patterns. So if you encrypt the data before you try to reduce it, you will have no success. Streaming media and still media, these are things that in many ways are already compressed by an algorithm. They use that lossy compression by taking away pieces that the human ear or the human eye don't notice. So it's hard to compress them further. In addition to that, they will have things that are unique to them, right? Two pictures of a boat, if taken from two different angles, result in drastically different data, right? So these are things that you need to keep in mind when dealing with data storage. If someone's coming to you and saying, well, I'll compress all that data, I'll dedupe all that data, I'll give you massive savings. If these are things that you have in your environment, they are either A, not going to work, and more than likely, the vendor that's speaking to you already has T's and C's in the contract that say, I'm not responsible for that. No one can be. It's just science, right? Data deduplication is the other technology, and that ultimately is looking at reading the data. It creates hashes of the data. You can kind of think of it as data fingerprints, right? And then it compares them as they come in to make sure that we only store a single copy. And that can be either inline or post-process. Post-process means that we do some garbage collection afterwards. So we look for that data, but we write it as quickly as possible so that the applications can perform well. And then we clean it up later, right? Keep in mind that both inline deduplication has that metadata that's required. Post-process also has garbage collection that's required. Most systems will do a bit of both. And that means you have a level of overhead that's required, right? So when all of us as storage vendors talk about data reduction, when we give you ratios of 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 or 5-to-1, we're not talking about the overhead, right? So that sometimes you may see a system and you buy it and you say, well, I thought I got 4-to-1, so why did you put this much in the system? Ultimately, these capacity savings efficiencies are about lowering the price and doing more with less. And so just be focused on what they're guaranteeing overall versus any specific ratio. And the last thing when it comes to data complexity that I do want to, or data efficiency, I do want to address is something that relates to cost, right? And that means sustainability. So more and more, and the more that the younger generations become voters and vote, the more that environmental focus when it comes to IT is critical, right? When you look at things like 2% of all greenhouse gases that are produced globally are produced by data centers, right? And that continues to grow, right? So you want to look for vendors and solutions that are committed to environmental sustainability, right? It's not just something to feel good about. It's also something that overall lowers your cost, right? So imagine a company, they've got rising operational costs. They need to refresh. They start by selecting the right hardware, perhaps things that are Energy Star certified, such as everything Hitachi makes, or a company that's committed to providing a carbon footprint, right? So all of our solutions come with a carbon footprint for our products. So I can tell you in creating this solution, how much greenhouse gas I have created. They implement it, they use data storage tiering, they adopt all these data savings techniques, they use thin provisioning, they look at cooling and the location. They may be looking at doing something good in terms of being environmentally responsible, but ultimately they're also driving their cost savings. And that brings us to our final audience poll.
Excellent. So if you recall back, efficiency actually ranked third as the top data challenge according to our audience today. But we are still interested, how important I should say, efficiency, sustainability, and carbon reduction initiatives in your IT strategy. We certainly hear a lot about this on the private sector side. So just curious to see how important it is for the public sector. Excellent. So similar response to the last poll. So it looks like somewhat important.
Okay. All right. And the more people answer, the more important it gets.
Yeah.
So, it is something to keep in mind. It's not just about cost savings. And a lot of what the government drives when it comes to environmental efficiency, right? It's very easy to justify as cost, right? The more efficient we are in terms of power and cooling, the more we save in terms of operations. So before we end, I did just want to give you an idea of why I found myself at Hitachi Vantara Federal and why I think we are the best choice to solve your major challenges in data storage today. Hitachi is over 110 years old. We have 900 subsidiaries. We are the #1 worldwide patent applicant for big data analytics and data storage foundation technology. Inside of Hitachi is Hitachi Vantara, one of the 900, and that is the data-driven business, completely focused on having the best intellectual property, domain expertise, and our data-driven technology. And then Hitachi Vantara Federal, where Melissa and I are, we're a wholly owned subsidiary of Hitachi Vantara. Why? Hitachi is a Japanese corporation. We deal with the federal government. So we are FOCI mitigated, we have a TS facility clearance, and by default, all of the support we provide on our systems is 100% US based. So how does our portfolio align? We can deal with data security challenges in our digital advisory services, our data governance, moving things to a modern digital infrastructure. We have our data complexity that we solve with our Pentaho Data Ops platform that allows you to modernize your ingestion and govern your data effectively. And then, of course, we overcome data efficiency with this digital infrastructure, including our virtual storage platform, Hitachi Content Software for File, and our app modernization services to streamline solutions for this multi-cloud world. But don't just take my word for it. Take a look at some of the customers that we help today in the defense, intelligence, and civilian agencies that we help navigate through this storage maze. So I know I didn't necessarily leave a ton for Q&A, so I apologize. There's a lot that I wanted to tackle, but we are walking into the Q&A session, which we'll kind of probably do abbreviated. Our contact information is in this deck, so if you have further questions or want to have a deeper discussion, feel free to reach out. But I'll open it up briefly to see if we have any Q&A.
And just a reminder, to submit a question, you should see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and insert your question there, and we'll take as many as we can in the couple minutes that we have left. And while we're waiting, James was kind enough to share with me a couple of frequently asked questions that he receives from customer visits. And so maybe you can address one of those to see if we get any questions. And if not, we can move on to closing after you address one of these questions.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So one question you had for me was, I'm dealing with a complex mix of on-premises and cloud storage solutions. How can I simplify the management of data across these environments?
Yeah, so one of the key, obviously, managing a multi-cloud environment is challenging. So to simplify that, what you're really looking for is, as I kind of highlighted in the second section, a unified storage management solution. Things with that are able to abstract the overall environment. So you want to be able to look at, say, and whether it is a VMware Virtual Cloud Foundation environment or ARIA environment, or a Redshift, Red Hat OpenShift environment, right? You want something that can manage all of these disparate data sets and disparate data storage silos from a unified platform, right? And that's where you want to look at solutions and vendors that can plug into those platforms and extend your capabilities with automation tools. So, all right, and we had one question about getting a copy of the slides that Melissa's already answered. So I will let everyone know, yes, obviously the slides are being provided in an email following today's session. So I do want to just wrap us up quickly with taking action and just keeping in mind three major takeaways. Data security is non-negotiable, right? Whether there's a law that specifically tells you how to do it or not, it's something that needs to be addressed. When it comes to complexity, you're going to need to simplify in order to thrive. And know that efficiency, both in terms of what you store and how sustainable what you're storing it on is, that's really what drives value in addition to getting data-driven insights. So I encourage you all, thank you for engaging with us on this webinar. I encourage you to continue learning with additional resources that are provided after today's webinar, schedule a discussion with us, or attend our next webinar. Which comes up shortly. So Melissa, I'll turn it back over to you.
Excellent. Go ahead. Next slide. So James mentioned we do a lot in servicing the federal government across data infrastructure, data analytics, et cetera. So we will be having various topics throughout the year. And the next one happens to be on October 25th, focus on e-discovery. And we'll be addressing a variety of different use cases related to e-discovery, not just in the area of legal proceedings, but think about fraud and detection, records management, supply chain analytics. We encourage you to join us again online here at the end of the month. Next slide. And we're super excited. We have these one-of-a-kind Talk Data to Me t-shirts. And so we'll be doing a drawing at random of attendees after today's webinar, and we'll send an email to the 10 winners just to collect your size and address, and we'll get one of these t-shirts into you to you in the mail very shortly. And then I want to thank Carahsoft, our host and sponsor for today's session. Should you want to follow up with the Carahsoft team, your point of contact is Jordan McFarland. His contact information is here and will be included in the follow-up email as well. And then to keep in touch with James, I do encourage you to connect with James on LinkedIn. Keep in touch with him. He'll constantly be providing information via LinkedIn as well. So we ask you to keep in touch with him, and his contact information is here should you want to. And that's really a wrap. Certainly follow us online in your social media channel of choice. We've got a variety of different updates, not only on this webinar series, but also best practices, et cetera, related to data storage and other topics. So we hope to see you online in the future. Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Carahsoft, and thank you very much, everybody participating today. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Take care.